my name is Joe Brady, and I'm here to talk about getting the light in the camera correctly right from the beginning. And this is sponsored by Sekonic, because we're going to be using some light meters to achieve this. Now, this is the first of a series. Today's session is portrait photography with ambient light. So what I'm here today to talk about is capturing images that are the best they can be right when they enter the camera, right when you press the shutter. Needs a little bit of planning, a little bit of creative thinking, and just a few tools to make this process somewhat easier. Now you might ask, well, why is this important? Can't I just get close and then fix it later in Photoshop or Lightroom? Well, while it can be fun to play in Photoshop and Lightroom, you're probably not getting paid to do that for all that time in front of the computer. Also, if your exposures need a lot of adjustments to the exposure and tone, each fix you make is going to further degrade the quality of your photo. Let's try to reserve the editing for our images for enhancements and adding a little beauty rather than for first aid. Now, I'm often asked, will a better camera help? Well, in some cases it might make things easier. However, in most cases, no. I've seen photographers create absolutely stunning images with their iPhones, while I've seen others with the latest top-of-the-line gear continue to take extremely uninspired and dull photographs. To quote Ken Rockwell, the camera's job is to get out of the way of making photographs. Now, having a great camera can make capturing great images easier, but in the end, the camera is simply capturing the light. It doesn't know why you're taking the photo, it doesn't understand the scene in front of you, and it doesn't know what elements are important. That's where you come in. So here's what we're going to talk about today. First, I'm going to start with evaluating the light. We're talking about how the light is illuminating our subject. Then we're going to go into composition, placement of the subject, getting rid of distracting elements. I'll talk a little bit about gear. I'm going to use light meters in this shoot, and light meters really will make your photography much better. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about the place for software, and I'll show you some before and afters. We're going to get it very close in camera, and then we'll do some edits just to make sure everything is really smooth. So let's start with evaluating the light. Now, when you're evaluating the light, you need to consider the shape and the direction of the light, the contrast ratios involved, and how the light's illuminating your subject. Now, our eyes see very differently than our cameras do. We can capture somewhere between 12 and 20 stops of tonal range, while our cameras are limited to around 6 stops. This can make the simple act of getting the exposure perfect really a difficult task. You might think exposure is easy. I mean, your camera takes care of that, doesn't it? Well, in some cases, yes. If it's a nice, bright, sunny day in the middle of the afternoon at a park, the camera's going to do a pretty good job. But in many cases, the correct answer is not quite. And in some cases, the answer for evaluating the light and getting a correct exposure is just plain no. While it's true that today's image editing programs can also do amazing things to help and fix bad exposures and too much tonal range, in almost every case, those edits are going to cause severe damage to the image. This can be particularly noticeable in shadow areas. Even a half stop underexposed, particularly on a high-key, bright background, can degrade an image. It's going to make it look dingy, and it's difficult to get your color and tone back correctly. So this is why I rely on a handheld meter for the vast majority of my photography. So why does all this happen? Why do I need a meter? Well, understand how your camera is metering light. Let me grab my camera here. The camera is measuring the light that is coming back off of the subject. It's influenced by the color and tone of that subject. Somebody walks into the scene wearing different clothing, different skin tone, different hair color, it's going to change the exposure. Now, also understand that your in-camera meter is trying to average all the tones coming into it into a mid-gray. And it's, depending on the camera, somewhere between 11 and 14% gray, not the 18% gray that everybody's talked about all these years. Now, this will work, as I mentioned, in evenly lit scenes, but not when there are deep shadows or fog or snow or just plain very dark or bright scenes. If you ever tried to take a picture in the snow and you went by your camera meter, you probably noticed it's always underexposed because it's trying to take that white scene and bring it down to gray. So that's where a handheld meter comes in. Now I'm going to start off with my first favorite meter. I have 3 of them here. This is a Sekonic 358. And the beauty of having a light meter instead of your camera is it simply measures the light actually falling on the scene, and it's going to give you an accurate reading from that. Now I'm going to be shooting live in here just using some of the ambient light, and we have a little hot light here that's going to be our simulated window when we do some live window shooting. It's as simple though as putting the ISO in. I'm going to be shooting at 640 ISO, pointing the dome towards the light that's illuminating the bright side of my face and looking at the number. It's really that easy. Now this meter can also measure ambient and flash ratios, it can measure contrast ratios, but we're just going to be using this today for ambient light. Now last week we did some shooting in a couple of different types of available light. Our first stop was a nearby diner for two reasons. One, it had a great set of windows. It was a great window light. And two, when we went outside to start shooting, it was pouring torrential rain. Actually, there were three reasons. We were also really hungry. We hadn't eaten yet. So let's go to that diner and take a look at the elements that were involved and see how we tackled this type of light.
So we stopped in for a kind of an early lunch, late breakfast, because it was pouring outside. And we weren't going to let that stop us from shooting. Actually, it's getting light outside. But interesting window light here, and what I wanted to do was use just the available light on Bethany to get this beautiful light coming in her face, so using the window light. The window light is going to be really bright on one side and really dark on the other. And if we relied on the camera's meter, we're going to get really different results. That's why I'm using a meter here. This is a Sekonic 358, and I'm shooting the camera, since we're using available light inside, I'm at 640 ISO. But what I want to see is, what is the bright side of the light on her face? I'm not that concerned about the shadow. Right now I just want to make sure this highlight is exposed correctly. Now a situation like this can be somewhat subjective in your metering. It depends what you're going for. If I want to make sure her entire face is lit, then I'll probably take a reading back from her chin and we'll see what that does. But I'm more concerned with getting the bright side of her face exposed correctly. And that's something that this can do that the camera cannot, because this is going to measure the light actually falling on her face. So I'm going to put the dome up, because again I want to measure the light coming in, and I'm going to position Bethany, so I'm going to be over here. I'm going to position her kind of looking off that direction, and I want to get my meter reading right here. And I'm getting at 640 ISO, 125th of a second, f7.1. I'm going to come in a little bit right underneath her chin, a little closer, and I'm going to get some variation between 6.3, 7.156, depending on how far back I come. Now, if I wanted to take a shadow reading, I can come over here and do that, and I'm getting 2.8, so it's a lot darker over here. But again, depending on the mood I'm after, I'm going to expose for that. Right now, I just want the side of her face that's facing the window to be shot correctly, so I'm getting 7.1. So let's put that in the camera and see what we get. All right, actually bring your arm down. Yeah, that's better. Oh, that's beautiful right there. Nice. Okay, and you'll get to see this in the video. 7.1 makes the overall scene dark, but the side of her face that is bright is now exposed perfectly. Because there's very little light in here, my camera meter was really thrown off. In fact, let me take a look and see what the camera says to do. So actually lean up against the window a little more. Turn your face this way a little bit, a little more, right there. Beautiful. One more. Now, the camera is saying, wow, the camera's all over the place. The camera's saying f5. If I meter off the side of her face, it's going all the way down to 2.8. So that's the variability here that is a problem. All right, so we got some great results. We're going to get out of the diner and go outside, shoot some more there. So we've done some narrow depth of field here, but let's see if we can get outside. It'll be a lot different results. Nice. All right.
All right, we had a couple interesting questions coming through as that little video was playing, and we're going to answer them because it's going to apply to what we're going to do right now. And what I'm going to do is first invite our friend Bethany onto the set. So Bethany, come on in. Nice to have you with us again.
Nice to see you again.
Bethany and I have worked together for, well, a couple years ago, I guess the first time we worked together. So she quit her world adventures. She was just in the south of France last week, and she decided to come back and actually work with us. I don't know if that was a great idea or not, but just have a seat. Now, a couple of questions that came through was one, somebody asked, why am I shooting 640 ISO? A good question. I'm shooting with a Canon 7D, and actually the base ISOs of these cameras is 160, and multiples of 160 are going to actually give you your best results. Going from 160 down to 100 isn't an improvement. So 160, 320, 640. I chose 640 because we are dealing with ambient light. These don't have the power of a flash. So it's going to give me enough depth of field so that I can keep her face in focus from the tip of her nose to the back of her ears and still get kind of close. So that's why I chose that. I needed to have a little bit of aperture room. There were some other questions about metering, and that's what we're here to talk about. So let's get started with that. Now, the first thing I like to do is to take a shot of the color checker passport, because this will allow me to create a custom camera profile and also do a white balance if I want. Now, and I'll show you why in a second. So if you would just hold that. And as you'll see in also one of the videos, see this face, you might have seen this combination before. Bethany was the model for all our color checker videos. So I'm going to do a light meter reading. Light meter, yes, I did say that correct. I usually screw that up. Question was, why would I meter towards the light and not towards the camera? Good question. Metering is somewhat subjective. However, the really important part is the bright side of her face. I don't want this to blow out. I'm going for more of a lot of contrast. I want this to be more in shadow, but this has got to be exposed perfectly. So I'm going to measure the light illuminating the side of her face, because that's where I want my exposure to be. So I have my meter's at 640, and my shutter speed's at 100 right now, but let's take a reading, and I want to get the light illuminating her face, and I get 7.1. That's simple. So I want to take a shot of the color checker with that exact setting. So I'll put 7.1 at 100th of a second in my camera, and I know that my exposure will be perfect. Now, I'm shooting tethered into Lightroom, so you'll actually get to see this happening. If you're shooting in studio, I highly recommend you guys take a look at this company called Tether Tools. I've really come to rely on this when I'm shooting in studio. Two things. One, I have an orange cable, makes it easier to see and you don't trip over it. And there's this little thing here called the jerk stopper. Don't you wish you had something called a jerk stopper you could carry around? It keeps the cable from getting pulled out of the camera, and it protects both the cable and this port, which is kind of dangerous. So you want to make sure that happens. So 100th of a second, 7.1, and I do want to make sure this is illuminated with the same light as her. So if you just kind of point it there, and I'm just going to take a shot of the target at 7.1, and you'll actually get to see this show up immediately. I'll take this. And then the other thing that I like to do when I'm shooting in studio is I like to do a custom white balance. So there you see the color checker target, and that's going to allow me to create a custom camera profile. What I've got going on in my tether setup is when I'm shooting, it's automatically applying the correct white balance and the custom camera profile. Subject for another day, but the beauty is once the images show up on the screen, they're almost done. They're really close to being finished. Now, to do a custom white balance, I'll do the same thing, except I'm going to take a shot of this white balance card. Let's get it kind of the same angle. Now, you do not need to fill the frame. That's kind of an old wives' tale. People think you have to do that. Really, on this particular camera, you just need to fill the center focusing circle. It varies from camera to camera, but nobody requires you to fill the entire frame. So, same thing. I'll just kind of get it in the middle there. And I take a shot, and you get to see, again, on the screen, that's all I need to fill. And that lets me create a custom white balance. So there you see that target show up. So then to create my custom white balance, and this is different on each camera, so you have to read your manual, but I just go to my menu settings till I see custom white balance. I don't know if I can actually show you this. I don't know if Rick if you can actually see that. Okay, right there, actually, yeah. You can see it says custom white balance right there. So I just choose that. And it automatically comes up with the last image I shot, which is the one you just saw. So I hit the button again to set it, and it says, okay, make sure you put your camera on custom white balance, which it now is. The advantage of that is these images that show up on the back of the camera are actually JPEGs. They're not your raw files that are being assigned whatever white balance is in the camera at that point. So by doing that, if I wasn't shooting tethered, I get a better result on the back of the camera. Since we're shooting tethered, I get to have that applied as we go in. In fact, Jen, if you would go full screen on my computer for a second. So I just want to show you, I'm going to back up to the color checker image. So here's the image of the color checker. And here's how I create a custom camera profile. It's really simple in Lightroom. I just go to File, Export with Preset, Color Checker Passport. That's it. Just give it a name. I already created one so that we wouldn't have to watch this process. And I'll just call it Test 5. And I click on Save, and then it creates a custom camera profile. The beauty is now all the colors will snap into place. And once you do that, it really makes life a lot easier. One of the things about a camera profile, even though you've got your white balance set, every camera is a little different. So if you happen to be shooting an event, maybe it's a wedding, maybe you're doing a portrait set where you've got two different photographers, two different cameras, maybe even different brands, by having a profile, then they will all snap into place. So what I've got is I've created a preset in Lightroom, again, a subject for another day. But what it allows me to do is to assign the white balance and the profile right as the images are going into Lightroom. So you might notice, and when we shoot live in a second, you'll see that the image will show up on the screen, and then a second later, it'll change color and tone. That's because it's getting the white balance and the custom camera profile applied to it. So as I mentioned, we're going to kind of simulate daylight here. With our window, we just have a ProPhoto tungsten light here as our continuous light source. So again, I'm going to measure to the light off the bright side of her face, and that's giving me 7.1. If I were to come back to the camera, it's going to give me a very different reading, 4.5. That's going to make the assumption that this, to me, is the most important part of her face. It is not. I'm after the highlight. I want that highlight to be right in the middle. And remember, when you take a meter reading, what it's telling you is what is the value right in the middle. So I'm getting a pretty consistent 6.3 to 7.1, depending on if I come up higher or not, or even with the side of her face, I'm getting 7.1. So I just put that in my camera, and I don't have to worry about anything else. So if you just look at me right there, great, and beautiful. You'll get to see this show up in a second. So let me take a couple of more. And I've got a really nice transition. There's a lot of drama to it. There's a lot of depth because we've got this nice ratio going from the lit side of her face to the dark side of her face. Let's take a look and see what the camera says. Now, we were at 7.1. Now, if I use the camera's meter to actually tell me what it needs, oh dear, it's telling me 2.8 because I have this big dark background there. It's trying to bring up the brightness to a light gray. So watch what happens when I shoot. What the camera meter says. Let me adjust a little bit. All right, I'm getting 3.5. And you can see the image when it shows up on the screen. Look at how bright it is. It's completely blown out. Not what we want to be dealing with. Look at that. That's not what we want. Trust the meter. It knows how to do this stuff. And let me just take a couple more. All right, give me the serious.
Okay,
serious. I'm mad at you. You were late picking me up from the train station. You brought me a blueberry scone. I hate blueberry scones. So she can't stay mad. And you get to concentrate on your subject rather than chimping, looking at the camera constantly saying, oh, is the light correct? Is the exposure correct? That's not very professional. By doing it this way, we're going to get consistent, perfect results every time. Now, while Bethany's here, I want to talk a little bit about composition and placing your subject in the frame. This subject alone probably deserves an entire day of discussion and examples, but I'm going to limit the scope to some basic recommendations. Now, what I'm talking about here should have a further explanation or better description, but what I really mean is the composition and placement actually in the camera's viewfinder as you're setting up your shot. As you look through the viewfinder, try to conceive what the finished image is going to look like. This is a great time to eliminate some kind of standard faux pas. That's French. She's so amused. That may hurt your photo. Now, while all rules are meant to be broken, there are a handful of guidelines that are going to help you create images with some balance, harmony, and staying power. So let's start with subject placement. Now, this may be really basic to some of you, but no discussion about placement should be talked about without bringing up that old standard, the rule of thirds. Now, as I mentioned earlier, rules are meant to be broken when the subject calls for it. But you need to understand this basic concept first before you start to break those rules. So let's bring up an image that actually has a rule of thirds grid overlaid on it. So very simply put, the idea is to think about your image divided into those thirds. A lot of cameras will do this for you by overlaying the grid in the viewfinder. And the points where these lines intersect are the strongest visual points. In many cases, placing the eyes, and Bethany's got great eyes, and you can see some of the images we shot, put them near one of the strong points, and my favorite is the upper right point there, will give you the most impact. Placing the person off center also creates some movement and anticipation, even when we're dealing with a sitting still subject. As you're going to see in a little bit, if we were to put her dead center, it looks very static. We read left to right. So I'm going to go from the light part on the left to her face. If I frame her in the middle, and I've got all this stuff out here where there's nothing, you're going to start looking for something, and you left her, and that's not what we're after. So let's take a closer look at two of the images from that first diner shoot we just saw. Now, in the first one, I did put Bethany directly in the center of the image, and you can see here. Now, while the light is great, the portrait seems static because of the placement. Let's take a look just moving her to the right. By placing Bethany on the right side of the frame, you follow the lines of the shades directly to her face. And since there aren't any distracting elements further to the right, your attention remains on her face and on her eyes. Now, the light on her face in that first shot, however, was still very nice. So let's take that first image again and do a crop of the image that will redirect your attention. Now, I'll talk about this some more later as well, but I frequently like to shoot, even my portraits, I like to shoot them horizontally, because I can always crop a horizontal vertically. You can't do it the other way around. Makes sense, right? So, after we left the diner, we visited a local train station along the Hudson River. There were some interesting opportunities for photos both inside the station and out on the platform. So let's take a look and see what we found there.
So we're at the Scarborough train station, and we're heading over to the Hudson River side. But as we were walking up the stairs, we came across this really cool spot. So we decided to use it. Now, as you can see, Bethany's got something. In fact, you might recognize her face now, if you've ever seen this combination before. She's got the color checker. So what that's going to allow us to do is to both have a custom white balance, or a white balance we can use in software afterwards, and to create a camera profile. So first thing I got to do is meter for that, again, because this has got to be perfect exposure. In this case also, I like the stairs. I actually want to keep them a little bit more in focus, so I'm not going to go for that real narrow depth of field. So I'm going to go a little bit bigger. So I'm going to go at f8. And at f8, I'm at 125th of a second, 320 ISO. And I'm going to go ahead and take this shot so I have this as a reference. Okay, so what I've got going on here, so we got Bethany dead center of the stairs. For most portraits, unless I really have to design it that way, I generally prefer to shoot horizontally rather than vertically, because I can always crop a horizontal vertical, but not the other way around. However, in this case, with these stairs, it could be interesting. And this also might work in one of those places where you break the rule about having the subject dead center, just because of the geometric pattern that's going on behind her. So I'm going to take a couple shots that way and see how it works. I actually kind of like this. All right, that's actually kind of cool. So if you're going to do something dead center, it generally pays to make sure that you are perfectly dead center. You want to have everything symmetrical left and right, because then it looks like you meant it to happen. Now, if I'm shooting horizontally here, and I shoot dead center, it's probably going to be a little static. As I take a look, yeah, it kind of is, but compared to if I come off to one side a little bit, and that works better. Now, with her hair being dark and it's casting some shadows on her face, I might need to add a little bit of light, but we're not using light, so I'm going to use a reflector for that. And I think I can probably just position it about right there. Yeah, that's going to work. So, Jen, Rick promised he wouldn't put Jen too much in frame. Okay. So I don't want to hear is this reflector make my butt look big. All right, actually that works really nice. Now since I did add a reflector into the mix, that is changing the lighting a little bit, so I do want to remeter that. So again, I'm more concerned about the light coming into her face, and it is a little darker up here. So now I'm at 1/100th of a second at 5.6. So let's dial that in, 5.6 at 100, and that's really nice. Reflector's really making her eyes pop. On this, yeah, on that side, bring your hair back a little bit more over your ear. Maybe just over your ear. There we go. Now tilt your head this way a little bit. Beautiful. And beautiful stuff. I'm going to see if vertical works here. Actually, it does. And again, even with the vertical framing, I'm going to push her off to one side. Because if I do it centered right here, since I don't have the background as much, it's okay, but it's going to be a lot more dramatic when I move her off to one side. And that is a dramatic difference. Let's get a couple more.
All right, so while that video was playing, I had some interesting questions come in. So, and there's things obviously I really need to clarify. First of all, there was a question on, am I shooting manual aperture priority or shutter priority? And almost everything I do is going to be manual. I like to take control of those decisions, and by using the light meter, it gives me the information I want. If I do know that I need to change my aperture, like say if I need really shallow depth of field and I know I need to do it 2.8, I can just spin the dial on my meter and it'll come back and tell me exactly what shutter speed I need. So I'm not using the camera's meter at all, and I actually rarely do. So someone asked, what metering mode do I use for portraits? If I was somewhere and I did not have my meter, which is infrequent, but it does happen occasionally, I generally will use the matrix metering because the cameras are pretty good. And what I'll do is I'll focus on the subject first and then reframe. And by doing that, the camera kind of gets a sense on what you're focusing on to add a little weight to the exposure on that particular part of the scene. But again, I just really prefer to use my meter. Now, someone asked if I can talk about the light meter in conjunction with the zone system. Actually, it's a subject for another day. That's one of the things I'm going to talk about when I talk about metering for landscape photography, which will be our next session. So stay tuned for that. Now, someone asked, can I set the camera for spot metering? I could. I could set my camera for spot metering and try to take a meter reading off the face. Is it as accurate? No, and there's a lot of flexibility in the colors of the face. And again, I'm deciding at the reflectivity of the face. What do I do if I have somebody that's got really light skin or somebody that's got really dark skin? It's still going to be fooled. By measuring the light falling on the subject, it no longer cares what color skin the person has, what their clothing is, or what color their hair is. Someone else was confused about the 7D being the base ISO 160. That's actually something I learned fairly recent. My friend Eddie Tapp told me that the ISO base of that particular sensor is 160, and I believe most of the Canon high-end cameras work that way. So that's why I chose 640 as a multiple of 160. I understand most of the Nikons have a base ISO of 200. This is the kind of thing you Google. Go ahead and Google that one. I'm not sure what everybody's base ISO of this sensor is. And okay, that's it for now. So let's continue on and talk about some other objects here. Now you might have noticed that I used the color checker passport from X-Rite in that last location. Now again, just like when we did here in the studio, having the ability to create the custom camera profile and the custom white balance gives me the most accurate representation on the screen. So we're going to invite Bethany back out on the set. Now Bethany's a warm weather girl. I'm dying standing in front of these hot lights. She's loving it. So go ahead, Bethany. So when we were talking about doing this, Bethany asked me what should she wear. And I asked her to wear a warmer color. Because warm colors project. They come closer to the camera. Cool colors recede. And by having her dressed this way, with the kind of the slightly coolish gray background, it separates her out from the background a little bit better. Now, our eyes are generally drawn to the lightest areas of a photo first, and then the next thing is red. Now, they may linger and then explore the darker areas, but then you're still going to come back to that. Now, there are some exceptions to this. For example, if Bethany was dressed all in black, but she was on a white background, then the one dark object will kind of cry out for attention. And as I mentioned, colors have this similar effect. First, red. Warm shades of red are going to attract our eyes. After that, yellow and orange, while cooler colors like blue and green recede. We already did the color checker passport. We've got the red here. I've got a really strong contrast ratio here. And that's something that also is something you have to decide. It's going to affect the mood. Now, we're not using any lights. We're just using, well, we have our one light, which is simulating our window. But we're shooting as if it was just a window of light. We're not using any flashes. So what are you going to do if you want to lighten up this side? And we're going to cover that in just a little bit when we bring in a reflector. Now, after we were done shooting inside, We went to the river side of the station and did some shooting outside. While we were there, we ran into some other challenges, and that included, well, we had a really strong contrast ratio. We first shot with even though it was overcast, it was a very bright sky behind Bethany, and with her dark hair, it created a challenge. Also, it's a train station, so there often were distracting background elements that got in the way. So let's take a look and see how we dealt with that.
A little bit of a different challenge here, and this is again something that's going to really confuse the camera's meter. We've got kind of a bright sky back here, although it's kind of the same light illuminating Bethany, but that's going to be a challenge, and I want to see if I can pull it off that I don't blow that out. So in this case, I'm going to actually bring in a spot meter, and this is a Sekonic 758, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a spot meter reading off of what I see as kind of the brightest clouds out there. So I'm going to point through here and look for the brightest spot, and I can actually hold in the button until I see the highest number, and there it is. I'm going to move down to 160 ISO, 125th of a second. I'm getting f20, so that's pretty bright. So let me just take a look around, see if I see any more. Wow, I even got it a little brighter. I got all the way up to f29, which obviously my camera can't do. So what I want to do is, from this number, I want to open up 2.5 stops. That's a safety for my camera, because I know my camera can record 2.5 stops up from its middle reading. Now I could go through, how many f-stops down would that have to be, huh? I don't know. It's too much to calculate out, so that's why I'm going to let this do it. It can calculate that. This is a light meter, a spot meter, and a computer. You can see I push this button there, it says 2.5. So now, instead of f29, hold in the ISO 2 button, and
11.2.
I get f11. So we're going to go f11 at 125 at 160, and that's going to allow us to have her exposed correctly, yet protect those highlights in the background from blowing out. So ISO 160 at 125 at f11. That's all we got to do. So let's take the shot. Now again, as far as framing goes, where do I want to place her? I'm going to put her in a strong third. I'm going to put her in this case in the upper quadrant. All right, I'm going to put you dead center again. That's going to be wrong, which is too many uninteresting things. So there's this distraction of the river there. Now I'm going to cut that out. Beautiful. Now, give me a little smile. Come on, you're happier than that. You're going to France next weekend. Come on. All right, I'm going to shoot a couple verticals here. Actually, in this scene, that works really nice. Now, in this case, the sky is a distraction, so I'm going to shoot down and crop that out. Nice. Beautiful. By having the dark trees and the tracks behind her in the subject rather than the bright sky, I'm able to control that contrast a lot better and keep the focus on her, which is where it belongs. So let's go on to our next spot.
All right, we're back live. So a couple questions before we start shooting again. First of all, a couple of you asked about what lens am I using. I'm actually using a Canon 17-55 2.8. Since I'm in pretty close, the studio's a little bit tight, I'm using a wider lens so I can still get in close to Bethany. I'm mostly shooting in the 50 to 55 range. Let's see. So somebody asked, do I use the center focusing point? Yes, generally that's where I keep my focusing point. I like to just always have it in the center. I'll focus and then I'll compose. So good question. And where I'm going to focus? I'm going to focus on the light that, or the eye rather, that is my main subject. So for Bethany right here, my focus point is going to be the eye that's closest to the light, the one that's really lit. Someone asked, do I shoot full autofocus? Generally, yes. I generally do shoot autofocus. And someone asked, shouldn't you stand to the right, the side or rear of a subject when you're metering so that your body does not interfere with the ambient light? Good point. Let me bring my meter back. Actually, let's bring out the 758 because that's the one we just used in that last setting. So you might notice most of the times when I am metering, I will come behind her so I'm not in the way. In this case, this light is so bright compared to the ambient light, me standing around isn't really having much of an effect. But actually, let me put this back onto ambient reading. And I'm getting, still at 640, I'm at 100th of a second at 6.3. So again, it's going to be consistent. Someone asked now, isn't the graph, the histogram, a bit low in Lightroom? Well, apparently it isn't actually, because that was exactly the exposure I want. The histogram is going to tell you the relative distribution of lights and darks in the image. In this case, I've got nothing here that's really pure white. Bethany's got a bit of a tan. She's got this kind of deep orangey red. She's got very dark hair, and I've got a very dark background. So I should expect the histogram to be off to the right. But good questions. Now, a little bit about the spot meter. In fact, someone asked, can I use the spot meter in the camera to do a metering? That's a good experiment. Let's try that right now. Actually, would you hold that? I'm going to put you to work. Would you hold that a second? So what I did was I put my camera on spot metering, and I'm going to meter off the brightest spot of her cheek and see what kind of result I get. So again, right there, spot metering. The camera says I should be at f8 if I use the spot meter off of her face. So let's try that. And not too shabby. We'll see that come up in just a second. Then I'll take the meter and do the same thing. And the meter says 6.3. That's 2/3 of a stop brighter. So what that's saying is that according to my camera spot meter, that her skin is what? If it's darkening it down a little, it's saying it's a little brighter than that 18% gray. So her skin isn't exactly that mid-gray reflectivity. So that's why, again, having the meter is going to give us a better result. So let's take that same shot at 6.3 and we'll see the difference. Now it's a subtle difference, but now you can see at 6.3 we've opened up the shadows just a smidge so that we have a little bit better exposure. And again, 2/3 of a stop underexposed is enough that you're going to start to include some noise in your shadows. Now, this is the Sekonic 758 that we just saw in that last video. This meter is deserving of a webinar all on its own. It's an incident meter, it's a flash meter, it's a spot meter, and it's a full exposure computer. Now, I do want to clarify the point that I mentioned in the video about opening up 2.5 stops for that perfect exposure. Now, as you saw, this meter is also a spot meter. And by turning the viewing reticle on this side, I can then point at my light and hold in the button, and as I look around the scene, I get a readout inside here. So if I point right at that light, I'm getting f25 at 100th of a second. Now, this isn't actually in my scene, so it's not an issue. When you take that meter reading, it's putting that light level in the middle. Well, that's my highlight. I don't want it in the middle. I want it pushed all the way over to the right. So I need to protect this at the same time. The worst thing you can do for your digital photography is to clip highlights. You got to make sure there's a little bit of data in there. So all of your cameras can safely, from the middle, capture 2.5 stops brighter and 2.5 stops darker. So by finding out what that highlight reading is, in this case f25, if this was actually in my scene and I couldn't have it blow out, I can set this meter to automatically tell me what 2.5 stops open from that is. Because from opening up 2.5 stops from this f25, what it would do is it'll push the brights way over to the right of the graph, but still protect them from blowing out, because that 2.5 stops is a safety margin. Now, I've done another webinar on this, and we'll talk about it later. If any of you have this meter and it's driving you nuts, send me a note. But I can simply push in my ISO 2 button and see that that 2.5 stops down or opened up from f25 is
10.
f10. It's that easy. So it will automatically tell me that if this was in the scene, like we had that sky behind her, then if I shoot at f10, that will put those brights towards the right, yet will not clip them, and that's really important. So let me get my camera again. Okay. Now there are a couple of other tips I can offer you when you're posing in the camera. First of all, background elements. Now, we don't have any background elements here. I'm more concerned about placing her in the correct position. In fact, right now what I'll do is I'm going to meter one more time. Let me just get my incident meter again. And again, at 640 ISO. From right here, I'm still at 6.3. I'm just going to do a little compositional thing for you live. So at 6.3, I've got Bethany right in the middle. And yeah, the lighting's fine, but you can see as the image goes off to the right, I've got this gray background with nothing going on. I can always crop it to a vertical, but if I get it right in the camera and put her off to the right, then you can see I get a much more pleasing image. It's got a lot more movement. Again, we're reading from left to right and we're getting to see that. Now, background elements, as I mentioned, we don't have any here, but beware of distractions in the background. If you have too much detail, if you've got horizons cutting through their eyes or a piece of their head, or if you've got objects sticking out of their head, not good. And in many cases, just moving yourself or shifting positions slightly are going to cure these problems. A shallow depth of field on top of that can also help to blur these distractions. Now, you see this image right here. Bethany doesn't seem particularly happy about it. She's got some holes growing out of her head. So that's the kind of thing you want to avoid. Scan the edges. When you're looking through the viewfinder, take a close look around the edges. We're frequently so focused on the subject that you sometimes miss all these distracting elements that can creep in and get out of the way. Also, I like to have a little bit of wiggle room. Now, occasionally I will shoot cropped in camera, kind of to the final image, but I generally like to give myself a little wiggle room. So again, case here. If I'm shooting from this distance, and even I'm putting Bethany on the right-hand side, I've got some room there too. It's still a beautiful portrait, but by having a little bit more room to the right and above her head, it gives me the ability to maybe change the aspect ratio a little bit, maybe do a little bit of rotation. These cameras today have so much resolution that I can do cropping and rotation, and there's still going to be plenty of file there left. Now, I mentioned orientation. Now, unless I'm doing beauty or macro work, I generally prefer to take most of my shots in a horizontal orientation. There are exceptions, though. The reason I do the horizontal shots is two reasons. One is for creative reasons, and the other is for commercial reasons. Now, as I said earlier, I can always crop a horizontal image vertically, not the other way around. Secondly, if you're doing environmental portraits, if you give the subject some room in the scene, it kind of better explains how they fit in the scene, and it also encourages your client to buy bigger prints. Think about it, right?
Can't hurt.
Yeah, if you're going to be small in the image, then I need a bigger picture of you. And frequently images like that will end up over a sofa or over a fireplace, that kind of thing. So I'll shoot horizontal for that. And we would definitely like our clients to buy larger prints. So let's take a look at a lovely shot, centered image. However, there are some distractions going on here. Now, the lighting is lovely, but the centered subject and the distracting elements in the shot weaken the image. Her hand on the pole makes you go there. It's a bright area off to the right. And in that kind of blurred train sign or village sign in the upper left of the image are distractions, and they are not important to the image. If you crop out the distracting and unimportant elements, once again, we're focused on our beautiful subject, and that's, again, the same frame just cropped. Now, when you're photographing a portrait in ambient light, the most important element, of course, is... You're the most important thing, aren't you? Come on, admit it. All right.
Right now.
It's right now. Your subject or subjects are what have to be metered, with the background being of secondary importance. The time of day and placement of your subject in the environment needs to be considered, as well as some of those compositional elements. Now, before we play another video, and then we're going to come back and shoot again, by the way, I do want to do a couple more shots with Bethany, and I am going to shoot a couple of verticals, because I will do that as well. So I'll take one more meter reading. And again, oh, the other thing, dome up, dome down. This confuses folks, because you can recess these domes on both the 758 and the 358. Generally dome up, except when you're measuring individual studio lights. So when we do studio photography, we're using a lot of lights. Then I will put the dome in so that I can just measure the contribution of a single light without the other lights influencing it. So that's why that's there. So I get my reading, still at 6.3, and I'm going to shoot a couple of verticals now. Very nice. Now, in this one, I positioned her kind of dead center. Now, it can work. I'm going to come down a little bit just to change aspect. Actually, put your chin up a little bit and turn your head away from me. There we go, beautiful. I'm actually going to shoot down. Now this time I'm going to put her on the right-hand side and take a look at the difference between the center and the right. Now with her showing up on the right, it's a more dramatic image. And by the way, you see that little flip where the exposure changed and the color changed? That's when the preset is applying the white balance and the custom camera profile, and everything just snaps into place. Now, we did do one more visit to an outdoor location. Remember that?
We did.
It was our last shoot of the day at an incredible place called the Croton Dam. It's in Croton on Hudson, New York. The sky was overcast, but the bright water and the dark rocks behind the falls gave the camera fits when you try to get an exposure using that. We used another meter, a simple yet powerful meter, also one of my favorites. And bang for the buck, hard to beat. This is the Sekonic 308. And for basic metering, wonderful. So take a look.
Okay, so while we're at the Croton Dam, since the lights changed, the color temperature's changed a little bit, I do want to shoot a shot of the color checker. This will give me a reference when I go into software that I can white balance and color correct in one fell swoop. So I'm just going to take a meter reading at the color checker. I'm getting 6.3 at 125. Just plug that in. And that's it. Now I got something I can white balance off. I can create a custom camera profile for this spot, and then all the colors will just snap into place. Right? You've seen that done before.
Yeah, once or twice.
That's it. All right, so we're at our last location for the day. This is the beautiful Croton Dam. It's quite the architectural marvel. And we're switching to a third meter. If you just need a really good, consistent, easy-to-use meter, I've got this one here. This is the L308S. Really basic, very simple to use. And again, it's kind of a cloudy, overcast day. We have even light. Got a lot of wind here, but that doesn't matter. All I need to do is take my reading. Now again, I'm at ISO 160. I've got my dome. Really all I have to do is just take a reading right here, and I'm getting 1/25 of a second at f8. Now it doesn't matter if I have Bethany here, or she's actually going to climb up over the falls there and do a swan dive into the river for us, so maybe not. But I can meet her here, and it's going to be the same light over there. So I had her walking around a little bit earlier, taking some shots. What we're going to do is head over a little closer to the dam, and I'm going to try to slow the shutter speed down a little bit to get a little movement in the water. So you'll have to be still, and let's walk over by the falls. So I remetered, we got a little closer, a little cloud cover. I got 7.1 at 125, so let's go with that. Leave it on for now. Beautiful. Nice. Nice. Cool. Nice. Right there. It's getting a little cold out here.
A little bit.
Yeah. So again, really simple. I just put in my ISO here, take my reading of the light falling on her, and it's consistent. I can just adjust my shutter speeds. I see it 125, 160 ISO, I'm at f8. Just leave it there. Trust the meter, because the camera is going to give you a different result every time. Just by putting this number in, I'm going to be consistent, and I'm going to get the same exposure every time. So, you ready to call it quits for now?
Ready.
All right, so we're going to go back to the studio and do some simulated window lighting there. See you there.
All right, first thing I want to do is I want to thank you guys. You guys are coming through with great questions, and I appreciate it. First, a simple one. Somebody asked what kind of focal length am I using. I'm shooting around 50 millimeters. It's, to me, a nice focal length for a person. This is an APS-C size camera, so you have to multiply it by 1.6, which makes my 50 and 80 on a full frame. So that's a nice portrait lens. Someone asked about the ProPhoto light that we're using to simulate our window. It's called a Pro Tungsten. It's a 1000K light, a 1000 watt light. What is it, Rick? 1K. It's a 1K light, just right, really even distribution, and it's got a rheostat on the back. I can adjust it in full stops. Now, this is a good point, and I'm glad somebody brought this up. I mentioned I had a subtle difference in exposures, less than 1 stop. Someone asked, won't the color checker passport do an adequate job of making that correction without a meter? And the answer to that is no. The color checker passport's got nothing to do with exposure. It's not going to fix that. It's just going to handle color and white balance. Even 2/3 of a stop can damage your image. Yes, you can fix it, but you're going to cause noise, you're going to cause artifacts when you go to try to fix that in software. Now, this is another, I'm glad, also you brought this up. I've got my 308 here now. Again, another thing I love about this meter is it is nice and small, it fits in my pocket. So, someone said, if I meter Bethany's lit side, aren't those highlights as well? So why don't I open up the two stops from there? Well, let's see what happens. So I take a meter reading from her light side, and I'm still at 6.3. Well, if I opened up 2 stops, what's 2 stops open from 6.3? I always love to torture her. 2 stops from 6.3, let's see, 5, 6, 4, 2, it'd be 3.2, which is going to grossly overexpose because, yes, it's the bright side of her face, but it's not a highlight. If I were to do that, I would then be saying I want this side of her face to be almost white. And that's not true. So her skin has a lot of tone into it. So if I did that, that would really cause a mess. So I want to meter for the highlights. And I'm going to stick that number in my camera. I'm not going to open up from there. Now, a couple of questions about bright sunny days, photographing in hard sunlight. Tough to do. When you're doing that, I typically start bringing in a lot of reflectors or flash. And that's 2 sessions away. 2 sessions out, we're going to be doing bright sunlight outside in the shade, using fill flash and reflectors to balance the light on the subject versus that bright sunny day. So that will be our 2 sessions in the future. Someone asked, when I'm shooting Bethany and moving her to the right, am I still using the center dot for focusing? And the answer to that is yes, I am. I still will focus on her eye, hold in the shutter halfway, and then I reframe. And let's see, another good question. Someone asked, if I have more than 1 subject, do you meter each one of them? Well, I would to kind of just to see where they are. Now, when you're photographing a couple, let's say it was a wedding couple, who matters? No one else matters, really. This is the only subject. The guy's just a necessary evil. He's an accessory. She's what's important. But really, typically, when you're doing the light, you want to have similar light on both subjects. So I will meter them, but either her or if someone else is here and they're actually paying for it, then I'll make sure they're lit well as well. But generally, this is the subject. Let's see. Oh, another good question. So is it possible to have an example of fill light and have the details in her dark hairs and measuring with dome down? No need. Watch, we're going to actually do that. Cool. Oh, and someone had one last question. What white balance setting is in my camera when I take a picture of the color checker passport? It actually doesn't even matter. I had it set for tungsten because that's what we light. If it was daylight, I'd put it there. But when you create that profile, it's a raw file, remember. There really is no white balance embedded into it. And the software for the color checker actually knows which of those patches are neutral and does its own internal white balancing behind the scenes when it's creating the profile. So it really doesn't matter. Thank you, though. Really great questions. So to that, we do want to bring in a little bit more light on the other side of her. So I've got my reading on the highlight side, and she's at 6.3. Actually, I'm going to put, normally I would ask her to get closer to the window. Since my window moves, I'm going to move it closer to her. Now, where we position her in this window is going to have a big effect on how she's lit. Right now, she's towards the front of it. So we've got strong light here, but it's going fairly deep into shadow here. So if I'm photographing somebody in front of a real window, and I want a little more wrap, I would simply move her back in relationship to the window. So this softbox, again, is simulating a window. Simply by moving her back, now I've got light coming from forward of her that's going to wrap around this side of her face a little more. In fact, that's a good thing to show. Let's actually do that. So here's with her back of the window. So now we've got more light coming from here. And yes, I will remeter. And since I moved the light closer to her, now we're at f8. So let me go to f8. And now we've got the light wrapping around her a little bit more. Make sure my tether is still working. Yes, it is. There we go. If I move her in the front of the light, if I move this back, now we're getting less light on the far side of her face. And there's a little more depth in those shadows. I want a little more control over that, though. So I'm going to bring this light back up front a little more. And I'm going to bring in one more accessory. Actually, here, I'm going to put you to work again. Would you hold that? Thanks. I'm going to bring in a reflector. Now, a lot of times on a real shoot, I would have an assistant. In this case, my assistant is a C-stand who's just got this big silver reflector hanging. Reflectors typically 3 colors: white, silver, and gold. White I will use out in the sun because it's not quite as reflective as silver. Silver is really pretty harsh. However, since we're inside using hot lights, the silver will work. The gold ones I don't like at all. To me, they're too yellow, and it's hard to really control what it's doing. There is actually a 4th one that is gold and silver stripes alternating. That's really nice. Adds a little warmth, but not quite as yellowy as the gold. So what I'm going to do is use my reflector to add some fill light to the other side of her face. And notice I am pretty close. I'm almost kind of creating a little tunnel here. And the beauty of doing these kind of lights is I can see what effect it has with my own eyes. So as I move this back and forth, I can see that I'm getting the light where I want it. So can I borrow the camera again? Thank you. So I'll meter one more time. Again, I'm concerned about the highlights. So again, I'm F8. Actually, would you hold that one more time? Sorry. I'm going to come around the back just to see what I'm getting on the shadow side with this reflector. And I'm getting F4. That is beautiful. That's 2 stops. It's a 4-to-1 lighting ratio, which is one of my favorites for doing portraits. So let me get out of the way a little bit. Now I've got a reflector, so it's filling in the shadows a little more. And so now you can see there's less of a contrast ratio on her face than there was before just by bringing in that reflector. And I will sometimes come really close. Let me adjust my lights. And again, let's make believe this is a window, so I'd actually have to have her moving. But we can't do that to Princess Bethany.
Get the easy way out.
That's it. We move the lights to fit her. So I'm going to move this back a little bit as I knock it over. Since I moved the lights, get my reading, I'm still at F8. And again, I'm using that center focusing point. It's focusing on the eye, and then I'm reframing. And beautiful. Now again, if I want to bring in more of the reflector, I'll come a little forward with this. And as I do this, I can see the shadows on this side of her face opening up a bit. So now this will lighten up things even a little more. And you can see now we're starting to get a little bit of the hair. We still have a very dark background. When we get into lighting, I'll talk about adding lights on the background to separate out. We'll do hair lights and all that. But right now we're just dealing with ambient light. And the beauty of it is you see what you get. Now, if I was dealing with a window light and I did not have a reflector, what I can do is adjust her distance to the window. The closer she is, the greater the contrast ratio I'm going to have from the bright side to the dark side. You remember the inverse square rule, right?
I do.
Yeah, okay. All right, I won't test her on that. If I move her, let's say she's 1 foot away. If I double that distance to 2 feet away, there's actually not half, but 1/4 the amount of light hitting you. Every time you double the distance, it's 1/4 out. So that's why I'll use a reflector. If I wanted to soften this ratio from the dark side to the light side, remember the dark is staying the same. I don't have a light source here. As I move her further away from the window light, it's less of a contribution, so the ratio light to dark lessens. I think we're done shooting for now.
Think so?
Thank you, dear.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, always. Say goodbye to Bethany. Okay. We've got some great images, and you see them coming in. Let's talk a little bit about software. I mentioned at the beginning I prefer to reserve my software edits to enhance a photograph. I don't want to have to perform emergency first aid on my photos. I'll spend a little bit of time smoothing skin. I'll enhance the eyes. I'll remove diminishing or background elements that are distractions to my image. Me personally, I use both Adobe Lightroom and Photoshop for my edits, along with a few helper softwares. I'm a big fan of NYX Color Effects Pro, Viveza, and Silver Effects Pro. Now, I've got some webinars coming up where I'm going to step-by-step go over how I edit portraits. So stay tuned, we'll send you an email when they're ready to go. But until then, here's a couple of before and after edits. Now, we'll go back to the stairs in our first train shoot. You can see we've got this vertical shot, and yeah, the lighting's fine, everything's fine about Bethany there, except you can see the stairs are starting to disappear and some of the green walls are showing up. I also wanted to focus the light a little bit more on her. So what I'll do is, I fix the stairs by stretching them out, add a little bit of light into her, and let's take a look at the after shot. And we can see after, there's a big difference there. Now, let me get my questiony thing up here. Now, we spent a lot of time on the subject of getting it right in camera, but there's a lot more to do. So let me just take a couple of questions. Okay, somebody wanted to know, when are we going to learn about Lightroom presets? You know what? Let's take 2 minutes and do it right now. What the heck? Jen, would you show my computer screen? And I'll show you how to create a preset in Lightroom. It's actually very simple. All right, so here we are in Lightroom, and what I need to do is go back to one of my color checker shots. So let me bring that up. So here's my color checker shot. And from here, I will apply the profile, which is under camera calibration. And as I scroll up, you can see I have Sekonic Pro Photo Tungsten. Those are the lights we're using. Typically, if you haven't done this before, your software is going to start under Adobe Standard. And you can see there's quite a color shift there. Now, I would have to white balance this as well, which I can do by selecting any of these gray patches here. So let me do that. And I'm actually going to warm up a little bit. These are warming patches, so I'm going to come over too. So that would be my profile. But I don't want to use the Adobe preset. I created a custom camera profile. So I choose the Sekonic lights, Studio Pro Photo, re-white balance, and again, I'm going to come up here. Now I've got my white balance set perfectly. I've got my camera profile. The last thing I will do is go under lens corrections, and you can see that it sees my Canon lens, because if I turn this on and off, you can see there's a little bit of distortion. So I want that to be fixed as they're coming in. Once I've got everything set, I simply go over to presets, create a new one. I'm just going to call it test preset. And you tell it which elements from that image you want included in the preset. And I didn't do anything tonal, I didn't do anything color, but I did my lens correction, my white balance, and my calibration. Then I click on Create. I just created a preset in Lightroom. And when I'm shooting tethered, if you go to Develop Settings, right here, as I scroll down, you'll see User Presets, and here's my test preset. And that would apply everything we just did to every image we shoot. It's really that easy. So let's come on back live. So I hope I made that clear enough. Let's see. How close do I put the softbox to get a nice wraparound lighting? Good question. Depends on the size. When you're doing wraparound lighting, the size and the distance of the subject are going to affect that. And these are hot lights, which I'm not used to using. And man, there's a lot of heat coming off of this thing. I'm cooking here. Generally, I'll get really close. In fact, I might be that far away if I can get away with it. That will create a really nice gradual light. But it all depends on what look you're going for. If I want something a little more contrasty, I might come all the way out here to the edge, which is going to give more of a rim light. It's something you have to experiment with a little bit. And somebody asked, why am I shooting tethered rather than wireless? Good question, but we're throwing around really big files. And the whole wireless thing to me just is too inconsistent. It takes too long for the files to come in. By shooting tethered, I get to see it right away, and it just makes it a lot easier. So that's why I chose to do that. So let me just see, any more questions, and then we will finish up. Let's see. Oh, I just lost my questions. Here we go. Anything else? Okay, so Someone said they wish I would discuss other modes on the 758, like EV mode and all that. Yes, in the next webinar, again, when I talk about metering for landscape photography, I'll cover all that stuff. I'll go over zone system, I'll go over the EV mode and all that. And again, a subject for another day. If you want to learn more about custom camera profiles, watch one of my webinars on that. The Adobe standard profile has gotten better in Lightroom 4, but it really depends on your camera and it depends on the light source. I have found some cameras, the Adobe standard is pretty close, but then you go under fluorescent lights, it doesn't work at all. And then in other camera brands, they have a completely different way of rendering in color. So by doing a custom camera profile, everybody's got the same target. All the cameras end up the same color, the same tonal response under every light. So that's why I do that. But great questions. Thank you for that. Okay, so I mentioned we spent a lot of time about getting it right in camera, but there's a lot more to explore. So here's what's coming up. Next, as I just mentioned, measuring and evaluating light in landscape photography. Then I'm going to talk about using fill flash and ambient light. In fact, I'm going to sit down to talk about this. This is something I know drives a lot of people nuts. You're out in the bright sun, you need to add a little flash to get the raccoon shadows out from under the eyes, but it doesn't look right, it looks flashy. You want to look normal. So that's what we're going to cover, fill flash with ambient light for outside portraits. Then, bridal portraiture, something that had gone away but starting to come back. How do you make that bride look the best? Right? That's what's important, Bethany. Yes, she's shaking her head, yes. Then, location and environmental portraits. What are the issues there? When are we going to use fill light? When are we going to use reflectors? And then lastly, setting up your portrait studio with effective lighting, whether it be speed lights, hot lights, or studio strobes. So thank you. I want to thank you so much for the questions. And also, I would love to hear about subjects you'd like to learn more about. I mentioned this has been recorded. The low-res version will be up immediately. Give us until Friday. We'll replace that with an HD version so you can watch it full screen. You'll be able to see my computer screen much better. So until next time, keep shooting, and I'm going to leave you with a slightly paraphrased quote from photographer and environmentalist Ansel Adams. And I quote, "The single most important component of the camera is 6 inches behind it." Think about that. Use your mind and your heart in your photography, and the results will reflect that care and affection. So until next time, thank you for watching. Thanks for the great questions, and I'll see you online again soon. Bye-bye.